As I mentioned yesterday, after serving as a court judge in Tennessee, in the Tennessee Superior Court, and after he was appointed Major General of Tennessee's Volunteer Militia, he went back to the plantation and began to oversee the overall operations, including his whiskey distilleries. But he really developed a passion when he went back to the plantation of breeding and raising racehorses. And so that's what he did. He not only bred them to race, but he also raced them. Well, in 1806, he got into a dispute with a guy by the name of Charles Dickinson. Got in a dispute with a fellow by the name of Charles Dickinson in 1806. And what do you think it was over?
Racing.
A horse race, okay? Dickinson was also a horse owner, and they got in a dispute over a bet on a horse race. They weren't agreeing with, I guess, the results of a horse race. So in 1806, an attorney by the name of Charles Dickinson, who was also a horse owner, got in a dispute over a horse race. Okay, the bet they had made on a horse race. Well, the dispute got kind of heated, and Dickinson went as far as to call Jackson's wife an adulteress. And then it hit the fan. So in 1806, an attorney by the name of Charles Dickinson, who was also a horse owner, got into dispute with Andrew Jackson over a bet they had made on a horse race. And during their argument, Dickinson called Jackson's wife an adulteress. Well, that immediately enraged Jackson, and he challenged Dickinson to a duel. That's how you settled things in those days. So Jackson was insulted. He insulted Jackson's wife, and because he was a man, he challenged Charles Dickinson to a duel. Not probably the smartest move Jackson ever made, because it was well known that Charles Dickinson was the best shot in the entire state of Tennessee. He was a very good marksman, best shot in the state. And so what he needed to do is he needed to put together a strategy to try to survive the duel, because the duels were the same rules as the ones we had and the one that Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton had. You would pick the number of paces, turn, and fire. Now in the duel of Burr versus Hamilton, remember Hamilton chose not to fire. Well, I can tell you right now, Jackson had no intention of not firing. But he was trying to figure out what would be best. For him to quickly turn and shoot first, or have Dickinson shoot first, hope he survived, and then Dickinson would be forced to stand fast while he returned fire. Okay? Unlike our duel. But anyway. So, although very, very risky, Jackson decided he would let Dickinson fire first. Although very risky, he said that he decided in his mind that he was going to allow Dickinson to fire first. And he figured if he survived that shot, he could then take careful aim and fire back at Dickinson, because Dickinson would not be able to run. He had to stand fast. Okay? So, they meet for the duel. They walk a certain number of paces. Jackson lets Dickinson fire first, and he hit Jackson, missing Jackson's heart by less than 1 inch. He hit Jackson. But the bullet didn't go all the way through Jackson. It actually lodged in his rib cage. So it didn't go through. Is that a good or bad thing if you get shot? Well, if it lodges or goes all the way, if it goes all the way through, it's going to cause more what? Damage. So actually, it was kind of lucky that the bullet lodged in his rib cage, because it didn't go all the way through it. You know, the bullet hole's bigger as it comes through. If you're a deer hunter, you'll know that. So during the duel, Dickinson did fire first and hit Jackson, and he missed Jackson's heart by less than 1 inch, but the bullet lodged in Jackson's rib cage. And this is not folklore, this is the truth. Jackson took his left hand and pressed it over the wound to control the bleeding, took careful aim, because Dickinson had to stand fast, fired at Dickinson, and dropped him dead. So he holds his own wound to stop from bleeding. He's got a bullet lodged in his rib cage, an inch from his heart, and he stands there, which wasn't easy, took careful aim as Dickinson was forced to stand fast, shot Dickinson dead. It took Jackson the next 3 months to recover from that wound. And he kept the bullet for the rest of his life. He had the bullet removed from his rib cage and kept it the rest of his life. But he spent the next 3 months after the duel recovering. Now what do you think he did those next 3 months? Keeping in mind that he was just named Major General of the Tennessee Militia. Okay? I've just been named AP History Teacher at Moreland High School. So if I've got 3 months to prepare for a new job, what would I maybe do during those 3 months? What would I do? Plan, review my notes, make sure I gave you the best information. Well, that's what Jackson did. He began studying military strategies to better himself for that position of Major General of the Tennessee Militia. So during his 3-month recovery, he began to study military strategies so he could become a better leader, a better Major General. Now, we know that Jackson went to New Orleans, right, with the Tennessee militia, also had some Kentucky militia, Mississippi militia, and all that whole story, right? But we don't know that he actually was ordered to New Orleans earlier than that, because during this War of 1812, remember this battle didn't happen until late, right? They suspected that the British were going to go to New Orleans. They suspected right. They just didn't suspect the time right. So after he recovered, General Jackson and just his Tennessee militia were ordered to New Orleans because the federal government anticipated the British would be attacking that city. Were they correct in that assumption? Yes. It just didn't happen then. It would happen later, and he would end up going back. But he was summoned earlier to New Orleans because the federal government anticipated a British attack upon the city. So he took his own Tennessee militia and marched some 300 miles toward New Orleans, but never made it quite to New Orleans. Okay? So he and his militia, the Tennessee militia, were ordered to New Orleans because the federal government thought the British might attack there, which they actually did, but later. And they marched 300 miles towards New Orleans from Tennessee when the mission was canceled. Okay? Why was it canceled? Because the British weren't making a move on New Orleans yet. So after marching his men some 300 miles towards New Orleans from Tennessee, the campaign or mission was canceled. Now this is why Jackson had a little trouble with the federal government. When they gave him the order to cancel or suspend that campaign, Jackson was told to release his men, take them back to Tennessee at their own expense. In other words, the government wasn't going to help pay for the return trip back, even though it was their fault that they screwed up and sent him early. Okay? So Jackson was to release his men to return to Tennessee at their own expense, and this made him very angry. Now they were almost in New Orleans, so are they near a water route? Sure. Well, in those days, because Jackson was a general, he could have taken a ship back himself and told his men, you fend for yourselves and get back to Tennessee, which probably some generals would have done, okay? But he chose not to do that. He actually escorted them back to Tennessee and took their expenses out of his own pocket. And he paid for the men's return to Tennessee out of his own pocket. So not only did he not jump on a ship and take the easy way back to Tennessee and let his men fend for himself, he escorted them back to Tennessee at his own expense. He took care of the expenses. Well, several of his men got sick and were in pretty bad physical shape during this march, either down to New Orleans or back. 300 miles marching, we just think 300 miles, we think about getting in our car and driving. Can you imagine marching, over, rugged country and the heat and all that? Imagine walking to Casper and back. That'd just be 300 and some miles. Imagine walking to Casper and back, even on the highway in the middle of August. Can you imagine that? That would be no fun. Well, they're walking over rugged country and heat, and a lot of his men became sick. And instead of riding his horse, what did he do with his horse? Put the sick men on it and brought them back. So he walked almost the entire route himself. Walked it, okay? Because he put his sick men on the back of his horse. Well, the soldiers really, really appreciated his caring and his fortitude and his support. And one of the soldiers on the way back made a comment that Andrew Jackson's just as tough as hickory. Hickory's the toughest, hardest wood we have, isn't it? Or one of them. And one of his soldiers made the comment that Jackson was just as tough as hickory. And that was the toughest wood that the young men knew at that time. And as a result, from that point on, Andrew Jackson was given the nickname Old Hickory by his supporters. Stuck with him the rest of his life. Old Hickory, which was a name that was given to Jackson during that return trip back with the Tennessee militia. Okay, Old Hickory. Stuck with him the rest of his life. Now, I don't know if you know this about Andrew Jackson or not, but he was quite the Indian fighter. He was not fond of Indians at all. So that'll take us to our next little subtopic then, which is General Jackson, Indian fighter. He was not at all a fan of Indians. I'll tell you this preview. I usually wait till the end, but I'll just tell you this. The Native Americans so despise Andrew Jackson. If you ever go to the casino in Riverton, which you're probably not old enough, but some of you might have been in there, take a look at Native Americans and see if they ever put a $20 bill in one of those machines. See if they even will have one. Who's on the cover of a $20 bill or on the bill? Andrew Jackson. You watch lives. Very seldom will see Native American people that will carry a $20 bill. So who was the most happy when they made the decision to change the image on the $20 bill to a female? Native Americans. True story, and I'll tell you why. Okay, now, at this time in history, in the southeastern section of the United States, and that would be in this area here, there were many, many Indian tribes. And the one that was most notable at the time were the Creek Indians. Creek Indians. And they were located in the southeastern part of the United States. Now, most of the Creek tribe at the time had accepted the white ways, and many married white men, which really caused a split in the Creek tribe. But at that time in history, the Creek Indians kind of figured, if you can't beat them, join them, right? So they kind of conceded to the white man's ways, and many Creek women actually married white men. So you had a lot of mixed bloods among the Creek tribe. However, the Creek Indians that refused to accept the white ways became known as radical Creek Indians, and they were called the Red Stick Indians. The Red Stick Indians. So, as I mentioned, the Creek Indian tribe populated a lot of the southeastern section of the United States. Most of those Creek Indians had already accepted the whites' ways. Many, many Creek Indian women had married white men. There were a lot of half-breeds, for lack of a better term, or mixed breeds within the Creek tribe. But that group of Creek Indians that would not accept the white man's way and would not accept an Indian woman marrying a white man were deemed radical, and their name were the Red Stick Indians. Now what happened is the Red Stick Indians, again who were the band of radical Creek Indians, were kind of on the rampage. And these radical Red Stick Indians were willing to fight to the death to control their lands and to battle any white encroachment upon their lands. They were radicals. And their leader was a guy by the name of William Weatherford. He was the leader of the radical Creek Indians, also known as the Red Stick Indians. So the radical Red Stick Indians were willing to fight to the death to control their lands and battle any white encroachment. They were not fans of those that had succumbed to the white ways. And the leader of the radical Red Stick Indians was William Weatherford. Ironically, he was a mix himself. He was 7/8 Scottish and 1/8 Creek. But yet he led the radical Red Sticks. He was 7/8 Scottish and 1/8 Creek. So he had very little Creek Indian in him. But he was upset that he was a half-breed, and he didn't think that was right, and so he fought for the radical Red Stick Indians. Now, the Indians didn't call him William Weatherford, you think? They called him Red Eagle. That was his Indian name, Red Eagle. So William Weatherford was the leader of the radical Red Sticks, but he was a mix himself, 7/8 Scottish and 1/8 Creek. He was better known to the radical Red Sticks by his warrior name, which was Red Eagle. So Jackson's trying to get these Red Sticks that are on the rampage under control. Well, what event made Jackson go and do this? It was an event that happened in August of 1813. So this is the event that made Jackson aware that the Red Sticks were on the rampage, and this is why he went to get them under control, this event. And in August of 1813, there was a group of 550 white people, mixed people, and full-blood Creek Indians that were seeking protection from the Red Sticks. They were scared of the Red Sticks. The Red Sticks were on the rampage after them. And this was a group of 550 people, which included white people, mixed people, and full-blood Creeks. And these 550 people were scared to death of these Red Stick Indians because they were on the rampage, and so they sought protection at a fort called Fort Mims, which was in present-day Alabama. So this large group of people, 550 to be exact, which were made up of white people, mixed people, and full-blood Creek, were afraid, and they were seeking protection from the Red Sticks, and they went to a fort called Fort Mims in present-day Alabama to be protected. Now, just to kind of give you an idea, write this down if you want to, but it's kind of important. Of the 550, 300 of the 550 were white. 300 of the 550 were white. And of that 300 that were white, 175 were members of the militia. Okay, so they did have 175 militiamen in that 550. So of the 550 people at Fort Mims at the time, 300 were white, which included 175 members of the militia. Okay, what were the other 250 people? Either, what? Mixed or full-blood Creek. Okay, so in this Fort Mims, in present-day Alabama, because it's a fort, it's going to have 175 members of the militia there. Okay? It's also going to have 125 other white people, right? And then 250 people of either mixed or Creek descent. Well, on August 30th of 1813, that fort was assaulted by the Red Sticks. And it was an absolute massacre. The Red Sticks attacked Fort Mims, massacred the people that were in there, all 550. Now, when reports went out about this assault of Fort Mims, it was stated that it was a, quote, massacre of whites by Indians. It was a massacre of whites by Indians. Is that a true statement? Were all those people that were massacred white? No. Okay, but that's how it went out in the news. Is these Indians, these Red Stick Indians, went in there and massacred 550 white people. Well, that wasn't true. Okay? Because 250 of those 550 were actually mixed and Creek Indians. So really were the Red Sticks kind of a civil war? Were they killing their own people? Sure they were, okay? Well, this is the event that sent General Jackson and his militia to Fort Mims, because his militia was the closest militia station to Fort Mims, okay? So when the word came out of this massacre of whites by Indians, General Jackson and his militia were called to present-day Alabama to defeat those Red Sticks. And they fought them several times. In the first battle between Jackson's militia and the Red Sticks, Jackson's men, who suffered minimal casualties, killed between 400 and 500 Red Stick Indians. So they have a first clash. Jackson's men do well. He has minimal casualties. In the meantime, his militia kills between 400 and 500 Red Sticks. Okay? Now let me ask you a question. Could there be Red Sticks that were not men? Could you be a radical woman, Indian? Sure you could. You wouldn't probably be a radical baby, but would there be children within that tribe of Red Sticks? Yes. Well, after this initial battle, in which 400 to 500 Red Sticks were killed, both women, children, warriors, a baby was found alive among the dead. So after the battle was over and they were cleaning up the battle site, a baby was found alive. What do you think the person did that found the baby? What did they do with it? They didn't kill it, which might make sense. I mean, well, they kept it, but who did they give it to? So one of the militia finds this baby. What does he do with this baby? Gives it to Andrew Jackson.